Just one mistake, just one error, or just one contradiction in the Quran destroys Islam. Hi, it's Debunking Islam here, and it's time to absolutely spank Allah once again. This time with some errors that you may or may not have seen. So in the Quran, Allah tells us He made everything in pairs. There is no doubt that this includes male and female counterparts in the human, animal, and plant kingdoms. This claim is catastrophic for Islam because there are many examples of female-only species of animals, insects, and plants. Therefore, the claim Allah made everything with a sexual partner is false. Allah did not realize that there are some single-sex species that exist that don't have partners. A God that didn't know this cannot be God. Error 2. In Quran 4:11 to 4:12, Allah lays out His rules for how much people should inherit from a man's estate if he dies. The verses translate to an inheritance that works out as half the share for a son, 1/3 for the daughter, 1/6 for each parent, and 1/8 for the wife. Now, if there is a situation where a man dies and he had 2 daughters, a wife, and 2 living parents, then this works out as follows. The daughters inherit 1/3 each, the parents get 1/6 each, which equals 1/3 combined, and the wife gets 1/8. You can see the calculation on the screen there, and as you can see, if you add these up, it comes to 1 and 1/8, or 9/8. When converted into decimals, we get the value 1.125. So in simple terms, what this means is if a man left behind £100, for Allah's calculation to work, there needs to be £112.50. In order for everyone to get the share Allah says they must be given. Well, £112.50 is more than £100, isn't it? So Allah, the creator of everything, the supreme and most wise being, got his maths wrong. He created an inheritance system that has a flaw that makes it literally impossible to work in many situations. You can actually use different numbers of sisters to make this much, much worse. So a God who can't add up cannot be God. Allah says He made everything from water. This includes humans. Well, we know humans are not made from water, but we do contain water, so Allah is already wrong. But anyway, in Islam, angels are the creation of Allah and are alive. And in Islam, the jinn are the creation of Allah and they are also alive. If you don't know, the jinn are basically a demon-like creature that live side by side with humans, but in some unseen realm. It's quite weird. So, Allah said all things are created from water, and this includes angels and the jinn. Well, this is a really big problem because the angels are created from light. Well, light does not contain water, does it? And the jinn are made from fire. And fire is not water. And it does not contain water, right? Well, it does contain some water created from chemical reactions within the fire and vapor from what it's burning. The water in fire is in the smoke, which carries the evaporated water as basically steam. But surely Allah is not referring to the steam and smoke from a fire when He says He creates all things from water, right? Because that would be silly, right? And it would beg the question as to why Allah bothered saying He created jinn from fire when He really meant the water from that fire. So you'd think no Muslim would actually argue that jinn are made from the phenomenally tiny portion of water in fire, right? Sadly, some Muslims do make this claim to prove Allah did not contradict Himself when He said He made all things from water, and then said jinn are made from fire. I really can't believe that they do this to themselves. Because not only is it ridiculous, but Allah made it clear that He created the jinn from a smokeless fire. The smoke is what contains the water. So the jinn literally cannot be created from water because the fire Allah used to create them was missing the water fraction of fire. So you really did not think this through, did you, Muslims? And neither did Allah. Now notice there, Allah also says He creates man from clay, which sounds like it contradicts His claim He made man from water. Obviously, Muslims are going to say, well, clay does contain water, which is true. But Clay contains less than 40% water. So why would Allah not just stick with saying he had made humans from clay as he's done before? Why bother then saying he also made us from water if what he really meant was that he made us from the water in clay? Allah's claim he made us from water to mean clay would make absolutely no sense. No, Allah says he created us from clay, and then he says he created us from water. So what is it? Because that sounds like a contradiction to me. To be honest, it doesn't really matter because humans cannot be made from clay. I really don't need to point this out. Clay contains aluminium, and the human body is not made from even minute traces of aluminium. We do have aluminium in our body that we ingest after we are born, but we are not made from aluminium. Well, if we were made from clay, we would absolutely have to be made from some small amount of aluminium, but we're not. So that's another mistake. So as you can see, the claim all things were made from water is not true for the jinn, it's not true for the angels, it's factually wrong with regard to humans, and it's also a contradiction. Errors and contradictions by God prove that God cannot be God, or Allah cannot be God, should I say. The Quran tells us that Abraham built the Kaaba. Now, Abraham is roughly said to have lived about 2,600 years ago before Islam was unfortunately created. This is roughly in line with what the Jews and the Christians believe. So this means the Kaaba would have been built around 2000 BC, give or take 50, 100 years or so. Well, this is a problem because Muhammad said the Kaaba was built 40 years before the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built after the birth of Islam in around 700 AD, which is 2,700 years after Abraham lived, according to Islam. So the claim that the Kaaba was built by Abraham in the Quran contradicts what Muhammad said about when it was built because there's a gap of about 2,700 years or so. But if that wasn't bad enough, the Quran then goes and contradicts itself again, because it also says when Abraham arrived in Mecca, the house was already built. So that's another contradiction, because the Quran's already told us Abraham built the Kaaba after he arrived in Mecca. But now it's saying the Kaaba was built already when Abraham arrived there. To excuse this, some Muslims say the house was built by Adam and not Abraham. Well, if that's true, then why did Allah not just say that? He didn't say that. He only said Abraham built it. So a God who can't even remember when the house he ordered to be built was built, then that God can't be God. Okay, here's the last mistake. In the Quran, Allah says the Christians worship Mary as God and that the Jews worshipped Ezra as God. These are two massive mistakes. Christians do not worship Mary as if she is God, and the Jews never worshipped Ezra as God. To answer this, Muslims will say, Christians once upon a time worshipped Mary as God, and some Jews once upon a time worshipped Ezra as God. Well, that's pure invented nonsense. Nowhere does Allah suggest he's referring to a particular group of Christians or Jews who worship them as God. Historical evidence for such groups are almost non-existent, and what weak evidence does exist suggests there may have been one-off tiny groups who no longer exist. Why would Allah chastise all Christians and all Jews for something only an incredibly small number of Jews and Christians allegedly did? And why would he refer to these tiny groups no one's ever heard of in his perfect book when those groups no longer exist by the time he revealed that book? In his perfect eternal book, surely these verses can only make sense if we think Allah is referring to what most Jews believe and what most Christians believe. However, if true, and Allah was not referring to mainstream Christianity and Judaism when he accused them of worshipping Mary and Ezra as God, then we have another gigantic problem, because now we have verses in the Quran that refer to some Christians and some Jews some of the time, and other Christians and other Jews at other times. This will mean that when Allah refers to the Christians or the Jews, we will not know what Christian or what Jew he's referring to. Is he referring to mainstream Christianity and Judaism, or is he referring to a particular belief of a particular group of Jews or Christians? This will make the Quran an even more incomprehensible mess. Therefore, if Muslims have any sense, they will accept that Allah is referring to mainstream Christian and Jewish beliefs when he says they worshipped Mary and Ezra as God. But of course, if they do that, they have an error that absolutely sinks Islam, because that is not what the Jews or the Christians believe. And so Islam will be proved false once again, because a God who does not know what the people he created follow, then he can't be God. So there you have it. 5 clear errors in the Quran that no Muslim can refute. And if they try to, trust me, what they will give you will not be credible. It will be contrived, apologetic nonsense. This was debunking Islam, and Islam was just debunked.